So what happens here, if we go back to these numbers, we're going to see these numbers on advantage on guard and advantage on hit. So what does this even mean exactly? Advantage on guard is 2, advantage on hit is 4. What does this mean? Like, how does this even apply to anything, right? Well, the concept behind these numbers here is that once the enemy goes into block stun, they have a set number of animation frames they have to go through, right? Now, I just did a standing light punch, right? So I hit him on my first active frame, and then he goes into hit stun, right? So let me go back to the game screen over here. I'm going to go over here, walk up to him, and hit him with light punch, standing light punch. So when I hit him, you can see that the real animation, the hit stun animation, is not as dramatic. He's not going, ah, he's just kind of going, right? So it's very fast. But so is my light punch as well. Now, once I hit Nash with my standing light punch, what's actually going to happen is that two things are going to happen at the exact same time once a move connects. And that is, Nash is going to go into a hit stun animation, and my attack has to finish animating. Right? Because I'm in the middle of my attack. I just punched him, and now I have to do my follow through. So once I've hit Nash, he goes into a hit stun, I finish my animation. Both of those have to animate at the same time. You see them animate at the exact same time. Well, guess what? One animation is going to finish before the other animation most of the time. So if I hit him with my light punch, I had a few set number of frames that I have to go through before it finishes. And once I hit Nash, he has to finish going through his real animation, and at some point in time, both of us will recover, and both of us will be ready to do an action. Now remember when I said that frames are a measurement of time. Frames are a measurement of time. If you go back to this frame data over here, and you look at advantage on guard versus advantage on hit, what this basically means is when I punch him and I hit Nash, I have 4 frames. My animation is going to finish 4 frames before Nash's does. So in other words, my standing light punch will recover, and I am free to move 4 frames before Nash finishes his hit stun animation. And that's why it's really important to understand frames as a measurement of time. If you look at it that way, then you kind of have a better understanding of it. Now I'll look at these numbers and go, oh, okay, before I get to there, and as I mentioned, block stun and hit stun are different lengths, right? So block stun animation generally shorter. You can see that if Nash blocks my standing light punch, my light punch, which will go through the same animation as before, however, Nash's block stun animation is shorter than his hit stun animation. So by the time Nash recovers from his block stun, it's already been 2 frames that Ryu has recovered. So in other words, Ryu's light punch finished 2 frames before Nash's block stun did. If I hit him, Ryu will recover 4 frames ahead of time. If he blocks it, Ryu will recover 2 frames ahead of time. That's really important to understand. Again, hit stun, block stun, different things, right? Different lengths. And unfortunately, there's no universal math to this either, especially here in Street Fighter V. In Street Fighter IV, it was pretty consistent, but I feel like in Street Fighter V, hit stun and block stun are just kind of all over the place, whatever they felt like they wanted to make the moves. And it's a very calculated game. This game is a very calculated and very scientifically designed game. I can totally tell what they were thinking when they were making a lot of this game with normal moves and such like that. So again, those 2 numbers, hit stun, advantage on hit, advantage on guard. So now basically I can look through these numbers, and if I understand them as a measurement of time, basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at these numbers and go, okay, that means if I hit him with the stand medium punch button, look at this. I have a 6 here. That means, and if we go back to the seconds, if we go back to the time thought, think of this as like I have 6 seconds where I can do something before Nash does after I hit him with the stand medium punch, right? And then we can go through these numbers over here. Oh, look at this. Look at this crouch heavy punch over here, right? This is -10 and -7. So that means whether I hit him or he blocks it, he's going to finish his hit stun and he's going to finish his block stun before I finish my crouch fierce animation. Let me illustrate this guy for you guys on the game so you guys can actually see this a little more clearly. And I'm going to apologize here because what I'm going to do here is I'm going to change the characters because I really want this to be Ryu versus Ryu here so that they have the same jump. But you'll see what I mean by this. You'll see what I mean by frame advantage. Oh, I'm sorry, the advantage on guard and advantage on hit. Once I get this going here. So let's do Ryu versus Ryu. While I set this up, is there any questions? Is this making any sense, or is this just making more confusing to people on the stream? Is there anybody who has any questions on the stream or in the stream chat over here? Yeah, I'll give you a pass to use the restroom. That's fine. Okay. So someone asked, are hit and guard stun frames universal for all characters? Are some faster or slower than each other? That's actually a really great question. So if I hit like all these characters with these moves, will every character reel the same amount of time? Yes. The amount of time that you are stuck in hit stun or block stun is entirely dependent on the move that hits you. So in the example that I showed where like my standing medium punch was 6 on hit, I had 6 frames of advantage. That means I have 6 frames of advantage on every character. No matter who I hit with the standing medium punch, I will have that same 6 frames of advantage, no matter what. However, that's my... I switch between every single character. These numbers are going to be different for every character. Let me pull up a different character, for example. Let me go over here really quick. And let's pull up Laura, for example. And I'm going to go to Laura's frame data here. If you look at Laura here, here's Laura. Her standing medium punch gives her a 4 frame advantage, whereas as I mentioned with Ryu, his gives you 6. So between every character, it's going to be different depending on the move that you use. Now this could happen because the hit stun is a different length, or the amount of recovery frames, amount of follow-through frames, animation frames on your move is different. There's a whole host of reasons why these numbers can be different, but all you really need to know is what the end result is. So, for example, with medium punch here with Ryu, this makes me so that I have a 6 frame advantage over my opponent, whereas Laura, if she hits you with it, she will have a 4 frame advantage. Now let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at this visually. How will this make sense visually? Let's take a look at this really quick. I said that if I hit you with standing medium punch, I have a 6 frame advantage. And again, every time I say that, think of that as time. 6 frame advantage. It's a measurement of time. I have 6 frames before I can do anything compared to you. So if I hit Ryu with a standing medium punch, pow, and I switch the computer to jump. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold up on my controller as soon as I unpause. And then the computer, the training dummy, is going to try to jump as well. What you'll actually notice is that I jumped before the other Ryu. And why is that? Why did I jump before him when I hit him with that standing medium punch? Well, it's because I have 6 frames of advantage. So I was able to jump 6 frames before the other Ryu. So now I'm jumping literally right now 6 frames before he is. And you can see this illustrated because I jump first and I land first and I jump first and I land first. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that crouch heavy punch, which I said was -10, right? So what does that look like, right? So if I hit him with a move that's -10, pow! What I'm going to do now is set him to jump and hold up. And look! The training dummy Ryu is jumping way before I am. So in other words, he had 10 frames of it. I'm sorry, on hit it was 7 frames. He has 7 frames of advantage against me. So the 10 frames was on block. So I'll show you that. Let's go to all guard here. So I'm going to make him block. And now I'll set him to jump. And now I'll jump. And you can see he's jumping way before I am. So that was the 10 frame advantage. The last example I gave was the 7 frame advantage that the opponent had. That the training dummy had. So this is how I can illustrate to you what it means advantage on guard and advantage on hit. You know, those are known as frame advantage or frame disadvantage. So if the number is positive, people call that frame advantage. And if the number is negative, people call that frame disadvantage. So here we go. That's what those numbers basically amount to. That's the important part of those. So here we go. Let's go back over here. And so again, back to Ryu. We saw that there's that +6 right there. This is why I was able to jump first when I hit him with that. And here's that -7 that I talked about, that once I hit him with the crouch heavy punch, he was able to jump before me. So that's how you would interpret these frames. You have advantage on guard, advantage on hit. You look at these numbers, again, just look at them all as numbers, right? Just look at them all as numbers. I'm sorry, as of course you're looking at them all as numbers. Look at them all as a measurement of time. A measurement of time. Frames are a measurement of time. So if you see 2, that means I can move 2 frames before the opponent. If you see -3, that means my opponent can move 3 frames before me. If you see -11, that means they can move 11 frames before I can. So that is essentially how you're supposed to look at frame data for the most part. Those are the 5 most important numbers for frame data, which is startup, active, recovery, advantage on guard, and advantage on hit. In fact, I would dare say that recovery is actually something that you don't even really need to pay attention to. Honestly, the most important numbers you're going to have in there is startup, advantage on guard, advantage on hit. Those are the 3 columns that you want to pay the most attention to when you're trying to study characters. Because you want to know how long a move takes to start, and once it connects with the opponent, you want to know what the effects are afterwards. Doesn't matter how many frames it takes to recover. It doesn't matter how many frames it takes to hit them or whatever like that. You know, just the startup of your move before you hit them and when you hit them, and then what the state is afterwards. Am I in frame advantage or am I in frame disadvantage? So that's kind of the intermediate portion of this lesson. So the basic part was just understanding what frames are. So the intermediate is understanding how to read a frame data table. And those are going to be the most important informations for you once you start getting into understanding frame data tables and reading them. So again, startup, advantage on guard, advantage on hit. 3 most important columns for reading frame data. Now, I'm just going to get into the more advanced section about this. But before I do that, I am going to take a short break here. And basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take an opportunity to have you guys ask some questions. I'll see if I can gather some questions. And when I come back, I'll try to answer some of those questions. If you're watching this on YouTube, just go to the next part of this video and you'll be able to see the answers to any questions that anybody asks me, if I get any questions. So we'll be right back, and stick around. All right, everybody, welcome back to First Attack. I'm James Chen, and I have this microphone pretty loud. Today, we are talking about frames. If you missed the first part of this, definitely check that out here on our YouTube channel. Or if you want to see this on Twitch, go check it out on the archives. I talked about the basic to intermediate areas of frames, where I talk about what frames are and then how to look at a frame data chart. But now here's where we get into a little bit more advanced situation here, because we've looked at this frame data chart. Let's take a look at this frame data chart here again. And we're looking at all these numbers here and everything. There's all these numbers. I told you these 5 columns right here, startup, active, recovery, advantage on hit, and advantage on guard, are probably the 5 most important columns. A lot of people are probably wondering what advantage on counter is. In case you guys do not understand what a counter hit is, let me just explain it really quick. I mentioned that you have startup frames of a move, right? So while you're starting to punch before it actually hits, during those startup frames, if you get hit out of your startup frames of a move, that counts as a counter hit. When you get counter hit, the hit stun that you get put into, so remember how I said hit stun animates for a certain number of frames, right? So let's just say this hit stun is 30 frames. If you get counter hit, it might increase the hit stun by 2 or 3 or 4 or a certain number of frames. So let's say on hit, you reel for 30 frames. On counter hit, you reel for 33 frames. So that's what this column here is for, advantage on counter. So if you can see here with that standing light punch example we gave, if I hit you normally, I have 4 frames before you can move. If it's a counter hit, I have 6 frames before you can move. Same thing again with that standing medium punch. If it's 6 frames when I hit you, normally, if I have 6 frames of advantage, if I counter hit you, I have 8 frames of advantage. So again, these 6 are basically going to be the most important columns you're going to be looking at in terms of frame data. But honestly, again, these 2 columns, advantage on hit and advantage on guard, and startup, are the most important ones. Those are definitely going to be the ones that you're going to be looking at the most when you look at frame data. So I did ask before the break for people with some questions. So here's some of the questions that I What's frame traps? It's a great question, and that's going to be answered in this section, actually. In the advanced section, you will start to understand what frame traps are. And frame traps are super important in Street Fighter V. I felt like that pretty much this game was kind of built around frame traps. So we'll get into frame traps. Don't worry, we'll cover that for sure. It'll be a very light coverage, but hopefully just by understanding what I'm going to show you guys, you'll understand frame data. I mean frame traps. I will do probably a full episode on frame traps if people desire that. But for now, I will get into frame traps a little bit later on. Someone else asked, and this is a really good question, I want to be good at fighting games. Like, I intend to be competitive in this. Do I need to know frame data? And you do not need to know the numbers necessarily. You do not need to know what the numbers are. Again, I'm going to talk about in this section, how do you interpret those numbers? How do you understand the numbers? Those numbers are going to be very, very important to you to figure out how to do one thing or another. But once you figure those things out, you'll remember forever, pretty much. And you won't ever have to go like, oh, wait, -5, this move is -5. No, basically, you'll learn how to interact with these moves. I'll get into that once we get into the, once I get into a little more details about this advantage situation and other such. Someone did ask, so, I mentioned that the startup frame, the last startup frame, is the same as the first active frame. So let's go back to the frame data here. So when you look at Ryu, for example, startup is 3. So what you'll hear a lot from commentary, what you'll see a lot in videos, what you'll read a lot on the Shoryuken forums or whatever like that, you'll see that someone say, Bison has a 3-frame jab. Well, does that mean the startup is 3, or does that mean the startup is 2, or, how does that apply? It's exactly the startup number. If you hear someone say, hey, this move, this is a 3-frame jab, that means the startup is 3. If he says he has a 7-frame hard kick, crouching hard kick, then that means the startup is 7. So whatever the startup is, that's how people use to describe those moves. On that note as well, once you start hearing people say stuff like, that move is -5, he could have punished that better than he did. That's exactly these numbers here, advantage on guard. So like if you see something blocked and someone says, wow, that was -10, that means -10. That pretty much the opponent had 10 frames that they were able to move before you.